Option 1. Action Climax Hook. Queen Jung-nyet. Grace saw it happening, saw the trajectory, saw Nate about to die. She didn't think, just moved, threw herself forward, pushed Nate aside. The bullet meant for his heart took her in the shoulder instead. She fell. Blood bloomed across her dress. "Grace!" Nate's roar echoed off the canyon walls. But this wasn't how their story began. The rain chased him all the way down the empty road. Nathan Carter, once known as the fastest gun in Texas, rode back into Ashwood Creek after 7 long years. The road shimmered under the storm mud splashing against his boots as his tired horse slowed near the edge of town. Ashwood Creek had always been a quiet place, but tonight it looked like it had forgotten how to breathe. Every window was dark, every street empty, as though the whole town knew a ghost was riding through. Nate pulled the brim of his hat lower, the rain dripping down his face, mixing with the dust and regret that clung to him like a second skin. He had no reason to come back, no home waiting, no family calling his name. Just the memory of what used to be and the weight of what he'd lost. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the weathered buildings for a brief moment. The general store with its faded sign. The saloon with broken windows. The church at the end of Main Street, its white paint peeling like old scars. Nate had tried to forget this place, tried to outrun the smoke that rose from his burning home that day, tried to silence the screams that still echoed in his dreams. But some things never leave. They just wait patient as vultures for you to come back. And tonight, as his horse stopped before the old church, Nate saw something that made him freeze. A woman, kneeling on the church steps, in the rain. Her belly was swollen, unmistakably pregnant. Blonde hair plastered to her face, arms wrapped around herself, trembling. Nate dismounted slowly, each step deliberate, careful. He made no sound beyond the squelch of mud beneath his boots. The woman looked up, eyes green as spring grass filled with tears and rain. When she saw him, she flinched, drawing back like a wounded animal. "Please," her voice cracked barely audible over the storm. "Please don't." Nate stopped. He raised both hands, slowly, palms out, showing he meant no harm. He said nothing, just stood there, in the rain, waiting. The woman stared at him, searching his face for danger, for cruelty, for the violence she'd learned to expect from men. She found none. Only a tired, weathered man standing in the downpour, hands, empty eyes, sad. Lightning flashed again. In that brief illumination, Nate saw more clearly. Bruises on her arms, purple and yellow in various stages of healing. Her lip was split recently. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Feet bare, covered in mud and small cuts. And around her eyes the unmistakable marks of fingers that had gripped too hard. "He's coming," she whispered. "He'll find me. He always finds me." Nate still said nothing. He shrugged off his long coat, the heavy canvas poncho that had kept him dry, and stepped forward, slowly, telegraphing every movement. The woman tensed but didn't run. Nate draped the coat over her shoulders, gentle, like she was made of glass. She gasped, surprised by the warmth, by the kindness. "Ma'am," Nate said, his voice rough from days of silence. "Church is locked, but my place ain't far." "I can't." She shook her head, water flying from her hair. "He'll kill you if he finds me with you." Nate looked at her for a long moment. His gray eyes held something ancient. Pain, regret, and beneath it all a fierce determination. "Been dead a long time, ma'am," he said quietly. "Ain't much he can do to a ghost." The woman stared at him. In that moment, under the crying sky, two strangers carrying unspoken wounds recognized something in each other, a shared language of loss. She nodded, small, trembling. Nate helped her stand, careful not to touch more than necessary, his hand under her elbow supporting without grasping. And they walked into the darkness, neither knowing that behind them a shadow moved in the church doorway. Someone watching, someone waiting. The road to Nate's ranch stretched 5 miles into the hills. He placed the woman on his horse, then walked alongside, leading the animal by its reins. No words passed between them, only the sound of rain, the squelch of mud, the woman's labored breathing. Nate didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she came from or who she was running from. Questions could wait. Right now she needed shelter, safety. That was enough. The woman gripped the saddle horn, her knuckles white. Every few minutes her face would contort with pain and she'd bite her lip to keep from crying out. The baby protesting this rough journey. After what felt like hours, she spoke. "What's your name?" Nate didn't look up from the muddy road. "Nate. I'm Grace." He nodded, still didn't look. "Thank you, Nate." He made no reply, just kept walking, one foot in front of the other like he'd done for 7 years, moving forward because stopping meant remembering. The rain began to ease. The clouds remained thick and black, but the downpour thinned to a drizzle. Cold wind swept across the open land, carrying the scent of wet earth and sage. They crested a small hill. Below Nate's ranch came into view. A modest wooden house weathered gray by years of sun and storm. A barn leaning slightly, fencing that had seen better days. Simple, lonely, like the man who lived there. Grace looked at the house and felt something loosen in her chest, a place to rest, at least for tonight. But as they drew closer, she saw something that made her heart clench. Beside the main house stood the ruins of another building, burned. Long ago, but the scars remained. Blackened support beams jutted from the ground like broken ribs, piles of charred wood and shattered brick, and there in front of the ruins, 2 small wooden crosses. Grace understood immediately. She didn't need to ask. Nate stopped the horse. He didn't look toward the crosses. Never did. "They were in there," he said, his voice flat as stone. "I wasn't." Grace looked at him. Understanding flooded through her. "How long ago?" she whispered. 7 years, 2 months, 16 days. The precision in his answer told her everything. He counted each day, every single day they'd been gone. Grace placed a hand on her swollen belly. The baby kicked, a reminder of life continuing despite everything. "I lost a child too," she said, her voice breaking. "My boy. He was 2. My husband, he threw him down the stairs. Said he cried too much." Nate finally looked up. His eyes met hers. 2 people who'd lost what they loved most. 2 people who understood a grief that had no words. No more needed to be said. They knew. Nate helped her down from the horse, led her to the house, closed the door behind them, locked it tight. Tonight, even if only for tonight, Grace would be safe. Inside the house was sparse to the point of asceticism. 1 bed neatly made, a table with a single chair, a fireplace cold, no decorations, no color, just rough wood and dust, the home of a man who existed rather than lived. Nate knelt before the fireplace, building a fire with practiced efficiency. He didn't speak, just worked. His movements slow, methodical, almost meditative. Grace sat in the lone chair, hugging her belly, watching him. "You don't talk much," she observed. Nate shrugged. "Ain't much to say. Most men, they talk, a lot, especially when they want something." He looked at her then, really looked. "I don't want nothing, ma'am." "Grace? My name is Grace." Grace. The fire caught flames licking up through the kindling. Warmth began to spread through the cold room. Nate stood and disappeared into a back room. He returned with a blanket, worn but clean, and offered it to her. "You take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." "No, I can't take your bed. You're carrying a child. You take the bed." His tone left no room for argument. Not harsh, just factual. Grace accepted the blanket. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. Both flinched at the contact, but he didn't pull away. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Nate turned to stare into the fire. The silence stretched so long Grace thought he wouldn't answer. Then very quietly he said, "Because I failed someone else once." "Who?" Silence. "Someone who deserved better than my fear." Grace understood. The 2 crosses outside, his wife and child, the ones he couldn't save. "I won't fail again," Nate said, still gazing into the flames. He stood, took his rifle from above the door, and settled into the chair near the entrance. "Sleep, Grace. I'll keep watch." You think he'll come tonight? Don't know, but if he does, he ain't getting in. Grace lay down on the bed. For the first time in months, she was on an actual bed, under a real roof, next to a man who didn't make her afraid. But sleep didn't come easily, because she knew Samuel would find her. He always did. Outside, the rain continued its soft percussion against the roof. Inside, two damaged souls sat in silence, each carrying wounds that would never fully heal. Midnight came. Grace woke, gasping, sweat soaking through her clothes despite the cool air. The nightmare, always the same. Samuel standing over her, eyes cold as winter steel, hand around her throat, voice soft, terrifyingly soft. You can't run from me, Grace. You're mine, till death do us part. She sat up, clutching her belly, shaking. Nate was still by the door. He hadn't slept. Head resting against the wall, rifle across his lap, but his eyes were open. Hearing Grace's distress, he looked over. You all right? Grace shook her head. Couldn't lie. Nightmare. She nodded. Nate rose, went to the small kitchen area, poured water into a cup, brought it to her, sat on the edge of the bed, keeping distance between them. Grace drank. Her hands still trembled. He used to, she began, then stopped. You don't have to tell me, Nate said. I need to. I need someone to know. Nate waited, patient as stone. His name is Samuel Harlan, owns half the county east of here. On paper he's a gentleman, church every Sunday, smiles at children, donates to charity. She paused, swallowed hard. But at home he's different. He doesn't yell, never raises his voice. That's what makes it worse. He's always so calm, so controlled. Grace looked down at her hands, at the faint scars there. The first time he hit me, he whispered, said, that hurt me more than it hurt you, like it was my fault he had to do it. Nate's jaw tightened, his hands clenched, but he said nothing, just listened. I tried to leave, 3 times. The first time he found me in 2 days, brought me back, locked me in the cellar for a week. No light, no food, just water. Said I needed to reflect on my vows. Second time I made it to the next town. He tracked me down, dragged me back by my hair through the main street. No one helped. They all knew him, respected him. Nate's knuckles were white now, but his voice remained calm. And the law? The sheriff works for him. The judge dines at his table. The priest takes his donations. No one will help me, because he owns them all. Grace's hand moved to her belly. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought maybe he'd change, but it got worse. He said the baby made me ugly, said I was useless, said if I gave him another worthless child he'd... She couldn't finish, didn't need to. Nate looked at her. His gray eyes burned with controlled fury. He ain't getting you, or that baby. You don't know him. He won't stop. Neither will I. The words hung in the air between them. A promise. An oath. Grace felt tears coming. Why do you care? I'm nothing to you. A stranger. You're someone who needs help. That's all I need to know. But you could die. He has men, guns, money. I've been ready to die for 7 years. Nate's voice was quiet but absolute. Today's as good as any, but I ain't letting him take you. Grace began to cry then, not from fear, from relief, from the overwhelming sensation of being protected rather than possessed. There was a difference, a crucial life-saving difference. Samuel had held her, but that was control, ownership, a cage. Nate protected her, but that was shelter, safety, a wall between her and harm. She could feel the difference in every breath. After a long moment, Nate spoke again. My wife Emma. She was pregnant too, when she died. Grace looked up, waiting. Our daughter Mary was 8. Emma was carrying our second. A boy, the doctor said. He stopped. Pain etched deep in every line of his face. I was chasing a man, outlaw, had killed a family down in El Paso. I tracked him for 3 weeks, caught him, brought him to justice. The guilt in his voice was a physical thing, heavy, crushing. While I was gone, the Dalton gang hit our town, burned houses, killed folks. My house was one of them. By the time I got back, there was nothing left, just ash and the bodies. Grace's hand reached out, hesitated, then touched his arm. Gentle. It wasn't your fault. I wasn't there. That makes it my fault. You were doing your job, protecting others. My job was to protect them. I failed. Grace understood then the impossible choice: save strangers or stay home with family. He'd chosen duty and lost everything. That's why you're helping me, she said softly. You're trying to save them, through me. Nate didn't deny it, didn't confirm it, just sat in silence. But they both knew it was true. They sat together in the darkness, two strangers connected by parallel traumas, two people who'd lost what they couldn't replace. For the first time in 7 years, Nate felt someone understood. And for the first time in years of fear, Grace felt safe. Suddenly, the sound of hoofbeats, distant but approaching. Nate was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He extinguished the oil lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Grace stood trembling. It's him! He found me! Nate pushed her gently toward the back of the room, placing himself between her and the door. Stay behind me. The hoofbeats stopped outside. Voices, men talking. 2, maybe 3. A knock on the door, firm but not violent. Nathan Carter, a voice somewhat familiar. It's Doc Hayes, open up. Nate relaxed slightly, lowered the rifle. He moved to the door, opened it a crack. Dr. William Hayes stood there, soaked from the rain, with 2 other men behind him. Nate, Doc said, breathing hard. We need to talk. Samuel Harlan's got men out looking for his wife, says she stole from him, got the sheriff involved. Nate looked past Hayes at the 2 men, townspeople he recognized. Good men. He looked back at Grace, who'd gone pale. She ain't no thief, Nate said. I know that, you know that. But Harlan's got papers, marriage license. He's got legal rights to her. In the eyes of the law, Doc continued, his voice heavy, she's his property, and he wants her back. Nate closed the door, turned to Grace. Their eyes met. They both knew the truth. The law was on Samuel's side. Morality wasn't. But the law had guns, badges, power. What do we do? Grace whispered. Nate looked out the window. The sky was beginning to lighten, dawn approaching. We run, he said, before they come. Grace's hand went to her belly. 3 days of hard riding, with a baby 6 months along. It could kill them both, but staying would definitely kill her. Can you ride? Nate asked. I'll have to. He nodded, respected her courage. Get what rest you can. We leave at first light. Grace lay back down, but sleep was impossible now. Fear thrummed through her veins like electricity. Nate stood by the window, watching the darkness fade. Planning. Calculating. 3 days to the territorial border. Once across, Harlan had no jurisdiction. Grace would be free. 3 days. Across rough country. With a pregnant woman. Being hunted. The odds weren't good. But Nate had faced worse. And this time failure wasn't an option. Dawn broke gray and cold. Nate moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for the journey. 2 horses, food for 3 days, water, ammunition, blankets. Grace stood watching, feeling useless. Her swollen belly made everything difficult. She couldn't help much. Where will we go? She asked. North, toward the territory line. Once we cross, Harlan ain't got jurisdiction. How far? 3 days. Hard riding. Grace looked down at her belly. 3 days. On horseback, with the baby protesting every mile. I can do it, she said, voice more determined than she felt. Nate looked at her, nodded. He didn't doubt her. Doc Hayes returned alone this time. His face was grim. Harlan's got 8 men, hired guns, most of them. He's offering $500 reward for anyone brings her back. Dead or alive? Nate asked, voice flat. Alive. He wants her alive. Doc looked at Grace with pity. And the baby. Grace felt ice in her stomach. Why does he want the baby so badly? Heir, Doc said quietly. You give him a son, and he controls the inheritance. His father's will stipulates a male heir for the full estate. So that was it. Not love, not family, money, control. The baby was just another piece of property to Samuel. He's already sent men to check all the roads, Doc continued. You can't take the main routes. Wasn't planning to. There's a canyon path, old Apache trail. Rough, but it'll take you north without being seen. Nate nodded. He knew that path. Dangerous terrain, but hidden. Doc handed Nate a small bag. Medical supplies. For her. And if the baby comes early, you'll need these. The implication hung heavy. This journey could force an early labor, could kill Grace or the child, or both. Nate accepted the bag. Thank you, Doc. Hayes looked at his old friend. You don't have to do this, Nate. You could just let the law handle it. Law ain't on her side. Law's the law. Law ain't justice. Silence. Doc knew he was right, but couldn't say so aloud. Be careful, old friend, Doc said, then left. When he was gone, Grace spoke. You should let me go alone. I can't ask you to risk your life for me. Nate continued preparing, didn't stop working. You ain't asking. I'm choosing. But why? You don't know me. I'm nothing to you. Nate stopped, turned to face her. His gray eyes held depths she couldn't fathom. Someone needs help. That's reason enough. Grace stared at him, understanding that some men in this world helped not because they expected reward. They helped because it was right. Nathan Carter was one of those men. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. Let's ride. The canyon path was hell, narrow, rocky, hot as a furnace during the day, cold as a grave at night. Nate led the way, Grace following on her horse. They spoke little, conserved their strength, conserved water. Day one was brutal. The sun beat down like a hammer. Rock reflected heat until the air shimmered. No shade, no respite. Grace closed her eyes and endured. Her belly ached. Her back screamed. But she didn't complain. Nate checked on her every half hour. Didn't ask questions. Just looked. Made sure she was still upright. Still breathing. At midday they stopped. Nate found a crevice in the rock that offered meager shade. He gave Grace water. Drink, all of it. She obeyed. The water was warm and tasted of metal. But it was life. How much further? She asked. 2 more days. Maybe 3. Grace looked back the way they'd come. The town had vanished from sight, but she could still feel Samuel hunting her, like a weight on her chest. Suddenly Nate raised his hand, signal for silence. His hand moved to his gun. Grace froze. A sound. From behind them, rocks sliding, hoofbeats. They waited. Seconds stretched into hours. A deer burst from the rocks. Just an animal. Grace exhaled, shaking. It's okay, Nate said quietly. Just wildlife. But the warning remained. They weren't safe. Not yet. Night fell. They made camp in a small cave. Fire small enough to provide warmth, but not enough to be seen from a distance. Grace sat watching the flames, one hand on her belly. The baby was kicking hard, unhappy with this journey. Tell me about them, she said. Nate looked at her, not understanding. Your wife, your daughter. Tell me about them. Nate was silent for a long time. Then he began, voice soft. Emma. She was sunshine. Even on the darkest days. She'd sing, all the time. Didn't matter if she knew the words or not. Just sang. A small smile touched his lips, painful but genuine. Mary, she was like her mother, always laughing, always asking questions. Why is the sky blue, Papa? Where do stars go in the day? Do horses dream? He stopped. The pain too much. The day I left chasing that outlaw, Mary asked me not to go. Said she had a bad feeling. I told her I'd be back in a week, kissed her forehead. Promised. His voice broke slightly. I kept my promise. I came back in a week. But they were already gone. Grace placed her hand over his, the first time she'd initiated touch. You couldn't have known. I should have listened to her, should have stayed. Then someone else would have died. That outlaw would have killed more families. But my family would be alive. Grace understood. The impossible mathematics of heroism. Save strangers, lose loved ones. Every lawman's nightmare. "That's why you're helping me," she said gently. "You're trying to save them. Through me." Nate didn't deny it. The truth sat between them, acknowledged. They sat in silence, two broken people finding unexpected connection in shared grief. For the first time in 7 years, Nate felt less alone. And for the first time in years of fear, Grace felt hope. Day 2 was worse, hotter, more treacherous, and Grace was weakening. At noon she fainted on her horse. Nate caught her before she fell, called her name. No response. Her face was pale, lips cracked and bleeding. Fever burned in her skin. Nate laid her down, checked her pulse. Weak, breathing shallow. The baby. Something was wrong with the baby. He remembered Doc's medical bag, found the fever medicine, mixed it with water, gently helped Grace drink. "Come on, Grace, stay with me." She moaned softly, opened her eyes, didn't recognize him. "Samuel," she whispered, terrified. "No, it's Nate. You're safe." Hearing his name, she relaxed slightly, but the fever still burned. Nate looked around. No shade, no water nearby. They had to keep moving, but Grace couldn't ride. He made a quick decision. Secured Grace on his horse, climbed up behind her, holding her against his chest, controlled the horse with one hand, supported her with the other, and they continued. The first hour, Grace was unconscious. Nate felt her body shaking with fever, burning hot against him. The second hour, she began to wake. Realized she was in Nate's arms strong and safe. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm slowing you down." "You ain't slowing nothing. You should leave me, save yourself." "Ain't happening. I'm just a stranger." Nate was quiet for a moment. Then very softly he said, "Not anymore." Grace lay still in his embrace. For the first time in her life, she felt protected. Not owned, protected. There was a difference, a crucial life-saving difference. Samuel had held her, but that was a cage. Nate held her, but this was shelter. She could feel the difference in every heartbeat. Afternoon came. They rounded a narrow bend. Nate stopped suddenly. Down in the valley far below, he saw dust rising, a lot of dust. Riders, many riders. "Damn," he breathed. "What?" Grace looked where he was looking, saw the dust, understood. "They found our trail," he said. "How far behind?" "Hour, maybe 2. Not enough. They couldn't outrun them, not with Grace sick and the horses tired. Nate scanned the area, looking for options. A cave, to the left, small, concealed. "We hide," he said. "They'll find us." "Not if we're quiet." He guided the horse into the cave, deep, dark, cold. Nate dismounted, helped Grace down, covered the entrance with brush. They sat with their backs against the stone wall. Now came the waiting. The sound of hoofbeats grew closer, closer still. Grace held her belly, trying to breathe quietly. The baby kicked, hard. She closed her eyes, praying it wouldn't cause her pain, wouldn't make her cry out. Nate placed his hand gently over her mouth. Not to silence, just to remind. "Be quiet." She nodded. The hoofbeats stopped. Right outside the cave. Voices. Rough. Cruel. "Check that cave." "Ain't nothing in there." "Check it anyway. Harlan said check everything." Footsteps. Approaching the cave. Grace trembled. Nate placed his hand over hers. Calm. Steady. A man peered into the darkness. The dim light didn't penetrate far enough to see them. "Too small. Nothing here." "You sure?" "I said nothing here." Footsteps retreating. Mounting horses. Riding away. Nate and Grace sat frozen, waiting. 5 minutes. 10. Finally Nate whispered, "They're gone." Grace exhaled, shaking violently. Tears streamed down her face. "We made it," she sobbed. "We actually made it." Nate pulled her close, said nothing. just held her while she cried. In that moment, everything changed. They were no longer strangers helping each other. They were partners, survivors bound together. They stayed in the cave that night. Too dangerous to continue. Harlan's men were still close. Small fire. Enough warmth, not enough light to be discovered. Grace felt better. The fever had broken. The baby had calmed. She sat with her back against Nate. He didn't object. Accepted the closeness. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why haven't you remarried? 7 years is a long time to be alone." Nate was silent. Then, "Didn't see the point. Didn't deserve it." "Everyone deserves a second chance." "Not me." "You think you don't deserve to be happy." "I know I don't." Grace turned to face him directly. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "It's the truth." "No, it's guilt. And guilt ain't truth." Nate looked at her, his gray eyes full of pain. "I let them die, Grace. How do I deserve happiness after that?" "You didn't let them die. You were doing your job." "I chose work over family." "You chose to protect others. That's not a sin. That's heroism." Grace placed her hand on his cheek. He didn't pull away. "You saved me. You risked everything for a stranger. That's not a man who doesn't deserve happiness. That's a man who deserves the world." Nate didn't know what to say. No one had said these words to him in 7 years. Grace's hand remained on his face, tender. "You are a good man, Nathan Carter, and you deserve to be loved." Something shifted in that moment. A wall between them crumbled, not through action, through truth. Nate placed his hand over hers, held it. "You're brave," he said quietly. "Braver than you know." "I'm terrified." "Being brave don't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." Grace smiled, small, fragile. The first smile Nate had seen on her face. It was beautiful, like dawn after endless night. Suddenly Grace winced. Pain. "What's wrong?" Nate asked, concerned. "The baby kicking. Hard." He hesitated, then asked, "Can I?" She nodded. Nate placed his hand on her belly, gentle. The baby kicked against his palm, strong, alive. His face softened. Memories of Emma pregnant with Mary came flooding back, painful but sweet. "Strong one," he said, "like his mother." Grace smiled. I think it's a boy. I don't know why. Just a feeling." "What will you name him?" Nate asked. Grace was quiet. Then, "I don't know. I haven't let myself think that far. I'm so scared I won't make it, that he won't make it." "You'll make it. Both of you." "How do you know?" "Because I won't let anything happen to you." Grace looked at him, believed him, completely. "If something happens to me," she said, "promise me you'll take care of him, raise him. Don't let Samuel have him." "Nothing's gonna happen to you." "Promise me, Nate." He looked into her eyes, saw the desperation, the fear, and the trust. "I promise," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Grace rested her head on his shoulder, exhausted, safe. They sat like that until she fell asleep. Nate didn't sleep, just watched, protected, because she'd given him something he thought he'd lost forever: purpose, meaning. Dawn came. Nate woke Grace gently. "We need to move. Border's close. 1 more day." Grace stood ready. They left the cave, mounted the horses. But when they'd traveled half a mile, a voice rang out. "Grace." They stopped, turned. On the ridge above, Samuel Harlan stood, with 8 armed men, guns drawn. "End of the line, wife," Samuel said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Time to come home." Samuel Harlan looked down from the ridge, his face unnaturally calm. A smile played at his lips, the kind of smile that held no warmth, only ownership. 8 armed men flanked him, rifles aimed at Nate and Grace below. Nate's hand moved to his gun but didn't draw. 9 weapons against 1. No chance. "Let her go, Harlan," Nate said, voice level. "Can't do that. She's my wife, My property. She ain't nobody's property. Law says different. Samuel produced a folded paper from his coat. Marriage license. Signed and sealed. She belongs to me. The word belongs hit Grace like a fist. She'd heard it so many times, whispered in the dark, shouted in rage, always the same message. She was a thing, not a person. And that baby in her belly. Samuel continued, his voice honey smooth. That's my son, my heir, my blood. Grace trembled behind Nate, one hand protectively over her stomach. Grace. Samuel called, his tone shifting to false gentleness. Come here, darling. This has gone on long enough. You're confused. The pregnancy has your mind all turned around. Come home. I'll forgive you. The gaslighting was so familiar, it made Grace's skin crawl. How many times had he done this, hurt her, then told her she'd imagined it, beaten her, then blamed her hormones, her weakness, her imagination? I'm not going back, Grace said, her voice shaking but clear. Yes, you are. You took vows. Till death do us part. Remember, you killed those vows when you killed our son. Silence fell across the canyon. Even Samuel's hired guns shifted uncomfortably. Samuel's smile faded. His eyes went cold as winter stone. That was an accident. The boy fell. You threw him. You're hysterical. You've always been dramatic. The casual dismissal of their child's murder, the rewriting of reality, it was vintage Samuel. Grace felt rage building beneath her fear. Nate had heard enough. He turned to face Samuel fully. She ain't going back. Not now. Not ever. Samuel studied Nate, assessing him like a buyer examining livestock. And who are you? Her savior, her knight in tarnished armor. The contempt in his voice was thick. You're nobody. An old man playing hero. Maybe. But I'm the nobody standing between you and her. Then you'll die. Been ready to die for 7 years. Today's as good as any. Samuel sighed like a parent dealing with a stubborn child. Fine. Kill him. Bring her to me. Unharmed. Before any gun could fire, another voice echoed across the canyon. I don't think so. Everyone turned. Doc Hayes appeared on the opposite ridge, 5 townsmen with him, all armed. This ends here, Harlan, Doc shouted. Samuel's calm cracked slightly, annoyance flashing across his features. You're interfering with legal business, Doctor. Legal? You call torture and murder legal? I have rights. The law clearly states that a man's wife is his responsibility, his charge. I'm simply retrieving what's mine. The law protects monsters like you, Doc said, his voice carrying across the rocks. But today we don't care about the law. We care about what's right. Samuel looked around, calculating. 8 men on his side, 6 on Doc's, plus Nate, roughly even odds. Too risky. His face smoothed back into that terrible calm. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is, Nate replied. Samuel raised his hand. His men opened fire. All hell broke loose. Nate dove, pulling Grace down with him, shielding her body with his own. Bullets screamed past, chipping rock, kicking up dust. Nate drew his gun, fired. One of Harlan's men dropped. Doc and his men returned fire from their position. 2 more of Samuel's hired guns fell, but numbers still favored Samuel. Nate dragged Grace behind a boulder. Stay down. Nate, please don't. Stay down. He burst from cover, fired twice, ducked back as return fire sprayed his position. 3 of Samuel's men left. They spread out, trying to flank Nate's position. Nate fired again, hit one in the shoulder. The man fell screaming. 2 remained. Doc Hayes shot from the side, caught one in the leg. The man collapsed. 1 gunman left. He took careful aim at Nate. Time seemed to slow. The gunman's finger tightened on the trigger. The bullet left the barrel. Nate couldn't move fast enough. The bullet was going to hit him square in the chest. Grace saw it happening, saw the trajectory, saw Nate about to die. She didn't think, just moved, threw herself forward, pushed Nate aside. The bullet meant for his heart took her in the shoulder instead. She fell. Blood bloomed across her dress. Grace! Nate's roar echoed off the canyon walls. The last gunman prepared to fire again. Doc Hayes was faster. His shot was true. The man dropped. Silence descended. Gun smoke drifted like ghosts. Nate crawled to Grace, gathering her into his arms. Her blood soaked his hands, warm and terrible. "No, no, no. Grace, stay with me." She looked up at him, managed a weak smile. "Told you I'm brave." "You're an idiot. Why did you do that?" "Because I'm not losing you." Nate held her close, tears streaming down his weathered face. For the first time in 7 years, he wept. "You're not dying. You hear me. You're not dying." Doc Hayes rushed over, dropping to his knees beside them. His experienced hands examined the wound. "It's bad, but it missed the lung. We need to get her back to town. Now." Nate looked up. Samuel was retreating on horseback, his remaining men with him fleeing the fight they'd started. "He's running," one of the townsmen shouted. Nate looked at Samuel's departing figure, then at Grace bleeding in his arms. The choice was instant. "Let him run," Nate said. "She's more important." Doc nodded approvingly. "Help me get her on a horse. We need to move fast." They fashioned a rough litter, secured Grace as gently as possible. She drifted in and out of consciousness, whimpering with pain. The journey back to Ashwood Creek took 6 hours, the longest 6 hours of Nate's life. He rode beside the litter, holding Grace's hand the entire way, talking to her, keeping her present, keeping her fighting. "Stay with me, Grace. Just a little further. You're doing fine. The baby's fine. Just hold on." By the time they reached town, night had fallen. Doc Hayes worked by lamplight in his office, Nate refusing to leave Grace's side. The bullet had to come out. No anesthetic, just whiskey and something to bite down on. Grace's screams tore through Nate like knives. He held her hand, let her squeeze until he thought his bones would break, whispered encouragement. "You can do this. You're the bravest person I know. Just a little more. Almost done." Doc finally extracted the bullet, stitched the wound, bandaged her shoulder. When it was over, Grace collapsed into unconsciousness, face pale as death. "She'll live," Doc said, washing his hands. "But she needs rest. Weeks of it." "The baby," Nate's voice cracked. "Strong, still kicking. That child wants to live." Nate sagged with relief. He pulled a chair beside the bed, took Grace's hand in his. "Thank you, Doc." Hayes studied his old friend. "You love her." Not a question, a statement. Nate didn't deny it, just nodded. "What about Harlan?" "Sheriff's writing up a warrant now. With our testimony and the witnesses from the fight, Harlan won't bother her again." "And if he does," Nate's eyes hardened, "then I'll finish what we started." Days passed in a blur of worry and vigil. Day 1 through 3, Grace barely woke, slept mostly, her body fighting infection, fighting shock. Nate sat beside her bed, leaving only when Doc forced him to eat or sleep. Day 4, Grace opened her eyes fully, recognized where she was, recognized Nate. "You stayed," she whispered. "Wasn't going anywhere. The baby. Healthy, strong. Doc says you both are going to be fine." Grace's eyes filled with tears, relief, gratitude, something deeper. Day 5 through 7, Grace grew stronger, could sit up, could eat, could talk for longer periods. Nate told her stories about the town, about his life before the tragedy, about Emma and Mary. For the first time he spoke of them without the crushing weight of guilt, just fond remembrance. Grace listened, asked questions, learned about the man who'd saved her life. Day 8 through 10, Grace could walk, slowly supported by Nate, but walking. They'd make small circuits around Doc's office, a few steps more each day. Physical closeness built emotional intimacy. Nate's arm around her waist, supporting her weight. Grace leaning into his strength. One night, Grace couldn't sleep. Nightmares again, but different ones. Not Samuel hurting her. Samuel finding her, taking the baby, destroying everything. Nate sat beside her in the darkness. Can't sleep, he asked. Nightmares. About Samuel. He can't hurt you no more. I know, but I still see him, in my dreams. Nate took her hand. He's gone, Grace. For good. How do you know? Because I won't let him near you, ever. Grace studied his face in the lamplight, saw the absolute determination, believed him. Stay with me tonight, she asked quietly. Just stay. I don't want to be alone. Nate hesitated only a moment, then nodded. He lay down on the bed beside her, on top of the covers. Not touching, just present. Grace rolled toward him, rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't push her away, wrapped his arm around her. Careful of her wound. They lay like that, said nothing, just existed together. For the first time in weeks, Grace slept without nightmares, and for the first time in 7 years, Nate felt warmth. 2 weeks after the shooting, Grace was nearly healed. The wound was clean stitches holding. Her belly had grown noticeably larger. The baby very active. Doc Hayes said it could happen any time now. Be ready. Grace and Nate sat on the porch of Doc's office watching the sun set over Ashwood Creek. What will you do now? Nate asked. I don't know. I don't have anywhere to go. No family. No home. You could stay here, in town. Doc said his sister needs help at the boarding house. Grace was quiet. Then, is that what you want? For me to stay in town? Nate didn't answer immediately. Conflict warred on his face. I want you safe, he said finally. That's not what I asked. Grace, do you want me to stay close, or do you want me to stay with you? Nate stood uncomfortable, not accustomed to discussing feelings. I ain't good at this, talking about such things. I know, but I need to hear it. Grace took a breath. Because I love you, Nate, and I need to know if you feel the same. Nate turned, looked at her, his gray eyes full of emotion he couldn't name. I don't deserve you. That's not an answer. Grace, I failed my family. I let them die. What if I fail you? What if I fail your baby? Our baby, she said softly. Nate froze. What? If you want. If you'll have us. This baby needs a father. A good father. And I need you. Grace stood, walked to him, took his hands. I'm offering you a family. A second chance. Why? Why me? Because you're good. Because you're brave. Because you saved me. And because I love you. Nate closed his eyes. The internal battle played across his features. I'm old, broken, got more ghosts than future. So do I. Maybe we can heal together. Nate opened his eyes, looked at her, saw love, saw hope, saw possibility. He dropped to one knee, taking her hands in his. Grace Sullivan, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to your baby? Will you give me a reason to live again? Grace laughed through tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed. First time. The kiss held hope, love, and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine. Around them, the town of Ashwood Creek continued its evening routine. Lights came on in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued. But for Nate and Grace, everything had changed. They were no longer two broken people surviving. They were two healing souls building something new. A week later, Nate brought Grace to his ranch. She was strong enough now to make the journey. When they crested the hill and the property came into view, Grace saw what Nate had built. Simple, functional, lonely, but potential everywhere. The burned ruins were still there, the 2 crosses marking graves. But Nate had planted something new, rose bushes around the crosses, young plants carefully tended. You planted roses, Grace said, surprised. Emma loved roses, Nate replied. Thought she'd like that. Grace squeezed his hand. She would. They walked the property together. The house needed work. The barn needed repair. The fencing needed replacing. But it was theirs. A place to start over. That evening, sitting on the porch watching stars emerge, Grace asked, "What will we name him?" They'd avoided the question, waiting to see if they'd both survive to meet the child. Nate considered. "Thomas, after your father, and Matthew, after Emma's father." "Thomas Matthew Carter." Grace tested the name, smiled. "Perfect." She placed Nate's hand on her belly. The baby kicked strong and insistent. "He approves." She laughed. Nate's face held wonder. "I won't fail him," he whispered. "I promise." "You won't," Grace said, "because you're not alone anymore." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen. For the first time in 7 years, Nate felt peace. For the first time in her adult life, Grace felt safe. The future was uncertain, but they'd face it together. A rider approached 3 days later, Sheriff Bennett looking grim. "Afternoon, Nate." "Grace." "Sheriff, what brings you out?" "Thought you'd want to know. We found Samuel Harlan." Both tensed. "Where?" Nate asked. "Mexico. Tried to cross the border. Mexican authorities arrested him. Turns out he had warrants down there too. Killed a woman years ago. Same pattern as with you, ma'am. Married her, abused her, she tried to run." Grace's hand went to her throat. "What happened to her?" "She didn't make it. He beat her to death. Claimed it was an accident. But there were witnesses." Silence fell heavy. "What happens now?" Nate asked. "He's being extradited. Trial in 3 months. With your testimony, Grace, and the evidence from Mexico, he's looking at life in prison, maybe hanging." Grace felt tears coming. Not sadness. Relief. "It's really over." "It's over," Sheriff Bennett confirmed. He tipped his hat. "Congratulations on the upcoming marriage, by the way. Heard the news in town." "Thank you, Sheriff." When he'd ridden away, Grace turned to Nate. "How do you feel?" "Relieved. For you. For us." "Not angry. Don't you want revenge?" "No. I got something better than revenge. I got you. And him." He placed his hand on her belly. "That's worth more than any vengeance." Grace kissed him. Soft. Sweet. Full of promise. They stood together on the porch, looking out over the land that would be their home. The storm had passed. The sun was shining. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future looked bright. A month passed. The wedding was planned for the following week. Grace was enormous now, the baby due any day. Nate had repaired the house. New roof, fixed windows, fresh paint. The place looked lived in, loved. Doc Hayes visited regularly, checking on Grace, making sure everything was progressing normally. "That baby's got a strong heartbeat," he said. "Could come tonight, could be another week. Babies keep their own schedule." Grace laughed. "I'm ready whenever he is." That night, as Nate and Grace prepared for bed, Grace suddenly gasped. "Nate, what's wrong? I think my water just broke." Nate's eyes went wide. "Now you mean now?" "Yes, now." He moved into action, got Grace to the bed, sent one of the ranch hands for Doc Hayes, gathered the medical supplies Doc had left. The labor was long, 18 hours. Grace screamed, cried, squeezed Nate's hand until he thought his fingers would break. Nate stayed beside her the entire time, wiped her forehead, gave her water, encouraged her. "You can do this. You're the strongest person I know. Just a little more. Almost there." Dawn was breaking when Doc Hayes finally said, "One more push, Grace. Give me one more." Grace bore down with everything she had. A baby's cry filled the room. "It's a boy," Doc announced, holding up the infant. "A healthy baby boy." Grace collapsed back, sobbing with relief and joy. Doc cleaned the baby, wrapped him in a blanket, placed him in Grace's arms. She looked down at her son. Perfect, tiny, alive. Nate stood beside them, staring at the baby with wonder. "You did it," he whispered. "You brought him here." "We did it," Grace corrected. "Together." The baby opened his eyes, looked around with the unfocused gaze of the newborn. Then his tiny hand reached out, grasped Nate's finger. Something inside Nate broke open. All the grief, all the guilt, all the years of feeling dead. It all cracked apart, making room for something new: love, hope, family. "Hello, Thomas," Nate said softly. "Welcome home." Grace smiled through tears. Our son." "Our son," Nate agreed. Outside, the sun rose over Ashwood Creek. A new day, a new beginning. The three of them bound together not by blood or obligation, but by choice, by love, by the shared determination to build something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Doc Hayes quietly left the room, giving them privacy. He stood on the porch watching the sunrise, feeling satisfied. Sometimes people got second chances. Sometimes broken things could be mended. Not always, but sometimes, and that was enough. Inside, Nate sat beside Grace, one arm around her, the other hand gently touching the baby's soft head. "Thank you," he whispered to Grace. "For what?" "For saving me. For giving me this. For choosing me." "Thank you for being worth choosing," she replied. They sat together, the new family, watching their son sleep. The past couldn't be changed. Emma and Mary would always be gone. Grace's first child would always be lost. But the future was unwritten, and they would write it together. Thomas began to fuss. Grace lifted him to nurse. Nate watched, marveling at the simple miracle of life continuing. "I love you," he said. First time he'd spoken the words aloud. Grace looked up, eyes shining. "I love you too." The baby settled, nursing contentedly. Peace descended over the small ranch house. Outside, the roses around the two crosses bloomed, red and white, beautiful and alive. A promise kept, a circle completed. Emma and Mary were gone, but they weren't forgotten. And in a way, through Nate's choice to love again, to protect again, to be a father again, they lived on, not in body, but in the goodness their memory inspired. Nate looked out the window at the crosses, at the roses. "I hope you'd approve," he said silently. "I hope you'd understand." The wind blew gently, rustling the rose petals, and for just a moment Nate swore he heard Emma singing. Just a fragment, just an echo. But enough. Enough to know that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. It continues. It finds new ways to grow. He turned back to Grace and Thomas, his new family, his second chance, his reason to keep living. "What are you thinking?" Grace asked. "That I'm the luckiest man alive. Even after everything. Because of everything. The pain led me here. To you. To him." He touched Thomas's tiny hand. "I wouldn't change that." Grace smiled. "Neither would I." They sat together as morning light filled the room. Outside, Ashwood Creek came to life. Shopkeepers opened doors. Children ran to school. Life continued in its ordinary way. But in this small house, something extraordinary had happened. Two broken people had found each other, and in finding each other, they'd found themselves. The wounds would always be there. Some scars never fully fade. But scars are proof of survival. Evidence that you can be hurt and still heal. That you can lose everything and still find something. That you can be broken and still be whole. Nate kissed Grace's forehead, then gently touched his lips to Thomas's soft hair. "Welcome to the family, son," he whispered. "We've been waiting for you." And in that moment, everything that had come before, all the pain and loss and grief, felt worth it, because it had led them here, to this room, this moment, this family. The last ride home was complete. Not the ride to death Nate had been making for 7 years, but the ride to life, and he was finally truly home. 3 months had passed since Thomas Matthew Carter entered the world on that spring morning. 3 months of sleepless nights and quiet joys. 3 months of learning what it meant to be a family. The wedding had been postponed twice. First because Grace needed to recover from childbirth. Then because Thomas had a fever that lasted a week, terrifying both parents until Doc Hayes assured them it was normal, just the baby's body learning to regulate temperature. But now, on a clear October morning, the day had finally come. Grace stood before the mirror in Maria Santos's boarding house, adjusting her dress. It was simple cream-colored cotton, nothing fancy. But it was new, and it was hers, and it made her feel beautiful. Maria fussed with the lace at Grace's collar, her weathered hands gentle. "You look like an angel," Maria said in her thick accent. "That man, he is lucky." "I'm the lucky one," Grace replied, turning to face her friend. "He saved my life." "No, mija, you saved each other." Maria's dark eyes were knowing. That is how the best love works. Not one person rescuing another. Both people choosing to stand together. Grace felt tears threatening. Pregnancy and childbirth had left her emotions closer to the surface than ever before. "Don't cry," Maria commanded, but her voice was tender. "You ruined the face and I have to fix again." Grace laughed, wiping her eyes carefully. "Where's Thomas?" "With Doc Hayes. The baby, he is fine. Stop worrying for 5 minutes and be a bride." In the small church at the end of Main Street, Nate stood at the altar feeling more nervous than he'd ever felt facing down armed men. He wore a black suit that Doc Hayes had loaned him. It was slightly too small in the shoulders, but it was respectable. His hair was combed, his beard trimmed. He'd even polished his boots. Doc Hayes stood beside him as best man, looking amused at his friend's obvious discomfort. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," Doc murmured. "Might be easier," Nate muttered back. "Too late to run now. Besides, you love her." "I know." "And she loves you." "I know that too." "Then what are you worried about?" Nate was quiet for a moment. "What if I mess it up? What if I can't be what she needs? What if I fail her like I failed?" "Stop," Doc interrupted firmly. "Emma and Mary's deaths were not your fault. You've carried that guilt long enough. It's time to let it go." "I don't know how." "Start by accepting the gift you've been given. Grace, Thomas, a second chance at happiness. Accept it without guilt. You've earned it." Before Nate could respond, the church door opened. The small congregation stood. About 20 townspeople who'd come to witness the union. Friends who'd helped Grace and Nate in their darkest hours. And then Grace appeared in the doorway. Nate's breath caught. She was beautiful, not in the polished way of wealth or fashion, but in the way of someone who'd survived hell and chosen to keep living. The way of someone who'd found the courage to love after learning how cruel love could be. Her blonde hair was pulled back simple and elegant. Her green eyes locked onto his. A smile played at her lips. In her arms, baby Thomas dressed in a tiny white gown that Maria had sewn. Grace walked down the aisle. Slowly. No one to give her away. She walked alone, carrying her son, choosing this future for herself. When she reached Nate, she stopped. They looked at each other for a long moment. Everything they'd been through passed between them in that gaze. The rain-soaked night they'd met, the desperate flight through the canyon, the gunfight, the blood, the fear, the healing. All of it led to this moment. Father Thomas Murphy, the town priest, cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Nate. He barely heard them. He could only look at Grace. She'd saved him. Not by being weak and needing rescue, but by being strong enough to survive, strong enough to fight, strong enough to choose him when she could have chosen to be alone, to be safe, to never risk her heart again. "Nathan Carter, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" Nate's voice was rough with emotion. "I do, now and forever." "Grace Sullivan, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do you part?" Grace looked at Nate, then at Thomas, then back at Nate. She thought of Samuel, of the vows she'd made before in a different church to a different man. Vows made in hope that had turned to chains, but these vows were different, because this man was different. "I do," she said clearly, then added, her voice gaining strength, "and I am no longer his. I am mine, and I choose you." The words rang through the small church like a bell. a declaration, a reclamation of self, a choice freely made. Nate's eyes filled with tears. He understood what those words meant, what they cost her to say. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Nate stepped forward, cupped Grace's face gently in his hands, kissed her softly, reverently, as Thomas squirmed between them. Applause erupted, whistles and cheers. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing. They turned to face their friends, Nate's arm around Grace's waist, Grace holding Thomas. A family, forged not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the determination to build something good from the ruins of the past. Outside the church, the October sun shone bright and warm. The harsh Texas summer had broken, giving way to the gentler autumn. As Nate and Grace emerged, rice rained down on them, thrown by laughing townspeople. Thomas began to cry at the sudden noise and commotion. Grace soothed him, rocking gently. "It's all right, little one. Just people celebrating. You're safe." Nate looked at his wife, his son, his new family. Safe. That word meant something now. Doc Hayes approached, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, you two. May you have many happy years together." "Thank you, Doc," Nate said, shaking his hand. "For everything. You saved her life." "You saved each other's lives," Doc replied. "I just stitched up the wounds." Maria Santos hugged Grace fiercely. "Be happy, mija. You deserve it." "Thank you, Maria, for the dress, for your friendship, for everything." "Pa is nothing. You come to me if you need anything, yes, especially when this baby gives you trouble." She tickled Thomas's tiny foot. The celebration moved to the town hall, where a simple reception had been prepared. Cake that the baker's wife had made, cider from the general store. Nothing fancy, but given with genuine warmth. Nate and Grace stood together, greeting well-wishers, accepting congratulations, feeling the love and support of a community that had rallied around them. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas grew fussy. Grace slipped away to nurse him in a quiet corner, Nate standing guard to give her privacy. While Grace tended to the baby, Nate found himself alone with his thoughts for the first time all day. He walked to the window, looking out over the town. Ashwood Creek, the place he'd fled 7 years ago, unable to bear the memories. The place he'd returned to in the rain, broken and lost. The place where he'd found Grace. "Penny for your thoughts," Doc Hayes said, joining him at the window. "Just thinking how different everything is now." "Better different, I hope." "Much better." Nate paused. "Do you think Emma would approve of me marrying again?" Doc considered the question carefully. "I think Emma loved you. And I think love wants happiness for the beloved even after death. Yes, I think she'd approve. I think she'd want you to live again." Nate nodded slowly. "I hope so. I hope Mary would too. That little girl adored you. She'd want her papa to be happy." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "I'm going to be a father again," Nate said quietly. "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you understand the responsibility. But don't let fear stop you from loving that boy, from being present, from being the father he needs." "What if I fail him?" "You won't, because you're not the same man you were 7 years ago. You've learned, you've grown, you've faced your demons." Doc clapped him on the shoulder. "And this time you're not alone. You have Grace." Nate turned as Grace emerged from the quiet room, Thomas content in her arms. She caught his eye, smiled. Yes, this time he wasn't alone. That evening Nate and Grace returned to the ranch. Their ranch now, their home. Thomas was asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement. Grace laid him carefully in the cradle Nate had built, tucking a soft blanket around him. They stood together, watching their son sleep. "Hard to believe this is real," Grace whispered. "That I'm safe, that we're a family. Sometimes I think I'll wake up and it'll all have been a dream." Nate took her hand. "It's real. I'm real. This is real." Grace turned to him. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. Happy. Hopeful. After everything Samuel did, I thought I was broken beyond repair. You were never broken. Just wounded. There's a difference." You healed me. No, you healed yourself. I just stood guard while you did. Grace laughed softly. Always so humble. Just truthful. She kissed him slow and deep. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I love you, Nathan Carter. I love you, Grace Carter. The new name sounded right. Perfect. They moved to the porch, leaving Thomas sleeping safely inside, sitting together on the steps Nate had repaired. The stars were coming out brilliant against the darkening sky. Tell me something, Grace said. Do you still think about them, Emma and Mary? Every day, Nate admitted. But it's different now. It doesn't hurt the same way. I remember the good times more than the end. I remember Emma's laugh, Mary's questions, the way we were a family. Do you think they'd like me? Nate pulled her closer. Emma would have loved you. She always said the strongest people were the ones who survived the worst and stayed kind. That's you, Grace. And Mary. Mary would have adored you, would have asked you 1,000 questions about the baby, about where you came from, about everything. He smiled at the memory. She was curious about the whole world. I wish I could have met them. Me too. But in a way, loving Thomas is loving them, giving him the life they never got to have. That feels right somehow. Grace nodded, understanding. Thomas is lucky to have you as a father. I'm the lucky one. They sat in silence, watching the night deepen, holding each other. Far in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound was lonely, wild, and somehow beautiful. Grace? Yes. Thank you. For what? For choosing me, for giving me this, for making me want to live again. She squeezed his hand. Thank you for being worth choosing. Inside, Thomas began to fuss. Grace started to rise, but Nate stopped her. Let me, he said. He went inside, lifted the baby carefully. Thomas settled immediately against Nate's chest, comforted by the strong heartbeat, the warmth, the safety. Nate walked slowly around the room, rocking gently, humming a tuneless melody. Grace watched from the doorway, her heart full. This man, this good, damaged, beautiful man who'd saved her life and stolen her heart. This baby, this miracle who'd survived despite everything. This family, built from ruins and hope and stubborn determination. It was more than she'd ever dreamed of having, more than she'd thought possible after Samuel. Thomas's eyes drifted closed, his tiny fist uncurled from Nate's shirt. Nate placed him back in the cradle, covered him gently. He turned to find Grace crying silently. What's wrong? He asked, concerned. Nothing. Everything's right. That's why I'm crying. I'm just so happy. He pulled her into his arms, held her while she wept tears of relief, of joy, of healing. We made it, she whispered against his chest. We actually made it. We did. I never thought I'd escape him, never thought I'd be free. You're free now. We both are. They stood together in the small house, holding each other, their son sleeping peacefully nearby. Outside, the roses around the two crosses swayed in the night breeze. Emma and Mary's final resting place. But not a place of sadness anymore. A place of memory. Of love that continued even after death. Nate had planted those roses as a memorial. But they'd become something more. A symbol. Of life continuing. Of beauty growing from grief. Of hope that refused to die. Tomorrow Nate would tend those roses, water them, prune them, care for them, just as he'd care for his new family. The dead and the living both honored, both loved, both part of who he was. The weeks after the wedding settled into a rhythm. Nate worked the ranch, repairing years of neglect. Grace tended the house, and Thomas slowly transforming the bare structure into a home. Curtains appeared in the windows, flowers in pots on the porch, the smell of bread baking, small changes that meant everything. Thomas grew rapidly, adding weight, becoming more alert, more present in the world. Nate marveled at every change, the first real smile, the way Thomas's eyes would track movement, the strength in those tiny fingers when they grasped Nate's thumb. He'd missed all of this with Mary, had been away so often chasing outlaws, serving justice. He'd told himself it was necessary, that he was protecting his family by protecting others. Now he understood he'd been protecting everyone except the ones who mattered most. This time would be different. This time, he'd be present. Here. Part of Thomas's life every single day. One evening, as Grace nursed Thomas before bed, there was a knock at the door. Nate answered, hand instinctively going to the gun at his hip. Sheriff Bennett stood there, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Evening, Nate. Sorry to bother you." "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" "Got some news. Thought you and the missus should hear it direct from me." Nate tensed. "About Harlan." "Yes, sir. Can I come in?" Nate stepped aside. Grace looked up from nursing alarm on her face. "It's all right," Nate assured her, though he didn't know if it was. Sheriff Bennett removed his hat, nodded respectfully to Grace. "Mrs. Carter, congratulations on the baby and the marriage." "Thank you, Sheriff. What news do you have?" Bennett shifted his weight. "Samuel Harlan's dead." The room went silent. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "What? How?" "Happened in the Mexican jail, 3 nights ago. Another prisoner, a man whose daughter Harlan had apparently hurt years back, well, he recognized him. They got into a fight. Harlan didn't make it." Nate moved to Grace's side. "So he's really gone?" "Yes, sir. I've seen the body myself. Went down to confirm. It's him. Samuel Harlan is dead." Grace sat very still, processing. The man who'd terrorized her for years, who'd killed her first child, who'd hunted her across Texas. Dead. She waited for relief, for joy, for satisfaction. Instead, she felt empty, hollow. "How do you feel, ma'am?" Sheriff Bennett asked gently. Grace looked up at him. "I don't know. I thought I'd be happy, but I just feel tired." "That's normal," Bennett said. "Closure don't always feel how we expect." "Did he suffer?" The question surprised Grace herself. Bennett considered lying, then decided on truth. "Some, but it was quick. Few minutes," the report said. Grace nodded. Didn't know why she'd asked. Didn't know why it mattered. "There's one more thing," Bennett continued. "Harlan's estate. He had no other heirs, no family. The courts want to know if you want to claim it. As his widow, you'd be entitled." Grace's response was immediate. "No, I don't want anything of his. Give it to charity. Use it to help women in situations like mine. I don't want his blood money." "You sure it's considerable? Could set you and the boy up comfortable for life." "I'm sure. I have everything I need right here." She looked at Nate, at Thomas, at the simple home they'd built. "This is all I want." Bennett nodded, respect in his eyes. "I'll see it's handled proper. And Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry for not helping you before, when you needed it. I knew what he was doing and I looked the other way. That was wrong." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit mistakes. Not as much courage as it took you to run, to survive, to testify despite the threats." He turned to Nate. "You got yourself a brave woman there." "I know it," Nate said. After the sheriff left, Nate and Grace sat together, Thomas between them. "He's really gone," Grace said wonderingly. "I'm free, truly free. How does it feel?" "Strange. I spent so long being afraid of him. And now there's just nothing. Empty space where the fear used to be." "That space will fill," Nate assured her, "with better things. Joy, peace, love. I already have those things. With you." She leaned against him. They sat in silence, processing. Finally, Grace spoke again. "I'm glad he's dead. But I'm also glad I didn't kill him. That I didn't let him turn me into someone capable of that kind of hate. You chose to live instead of seeking revenge. That's strength. So did you. When he was running away after the gunfight, you could have chased him, killed him. But you chose me instead, chose our future over his death. Best choice I ever made." Thomas yawned a tiny sound. His eyes were drifting closed. Grace carried him to the cradle, laid him down gently. When she returned to Nate, there were tears on her cheeks. "I'm crying again," she laughed. "I don't even know why." "You're allowed to cry. You survived something terrible. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. I just want to feel happy, to enjoy this life we're building, to not let him haunt me anymore. He won't. Not if you don't let him. And every day it'll get a little easier. The shadow he cast will get smaller, until one day you'll realize you haven't thought of him in weeks, then months, then years. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. The guilt about Emma and Mary, it used to consume me, every hour of every day. But now I can go whole days without that crushing weight. I think of them with love instead of pain. It took time, but it happened. Grace kissed him. Thank you for understanding, for being patient with me. I'll be patient as long as you need. They went to bed that night holding each other close, Thomas sleeping peacefully nearby. The ghost of Samuel Harlan finally laid to rest, the future open and bright before them. Months passed. Winter came to the Texas plains, mild by most standards, but cold enough that Nate ensured the house was well sealed against drafts. Thomas celebrated his first birthday, though he was too young to understand. Grace baked a small cake. They sang to him. He smashed frosting everywhere, making both parents laugh. The ranch began to thrive. Nate bought cattle with money saved from his marshal days, started building a small herd. Grace planted a garden in the spring. Vegetables and herbs and flowers, the house filled with life, with laughter, with the ordinary magic of a family. Doc Hayes visited regularly, checking on Thomas, sharing meals, becoming part of their small circle. Maria Santos came out once a month, bringing supplies from town and staying for long visits, teaching Grace recipes and telling stories in her musical Spanish-accented English. The townspeople who'd once ignored Grace's plight now rallied around the young family, perhaps feeling guilty for their earlier inaction, perhaps simply recognizing goodness when they saw it. One spring evening, when Thomas was 15 months old and beginning to walk, Nate and Grace took him to the river. It was the same river where Nate and Emma had once walked, where he'd proposed to her all those years ago. He'd avoided this place for 7 years. Too many memories, too much pain. But Grace had asked to see it, said she wanted to know all the places that were important to Nate. So they went. The river ran clear and bright, reflecting the sunset sky. Wildflowers grew along the banks. Birds sang in the cottonwood trees. It was beautiful. Thomas toddled along the edge, carefully watched by both parents, fascinated by the water, the rocks, the new sights and sounds. Grace spread a blanket. They sat together watching their son explore. "This is where you proposed to Emma," Grace said. Not a question. "Yes." "Tell me about it." Nate was quiet for a moment. Then, "It was summer. Hot. We came here because the river was cool. We waited in the shallows. Emma's dress got wet and she laughed about it, didn't care. She was always like that. Not worried about little things. I asked her right there in the water. Didn't have a ring yet. Just asked. She said yes before I even finished the question." Grace smiled. "She sounds wonderful." She was. "I'm not jealous, you know, of her, of what you had." "I know. I'm grateful for it. Because it made you who you are. It taught you how to love, how to be a good husband and father." Nate took her hand. "You're wise beyond your years, Grace Carter." "I'm just a woman who knows she's lucky." Thomas stumbled, fell on his bottom, looked surprised, then laughed at himself. Both parents smiled. "He's got your courage," Nate observed. "And your stubbornness," Grace replied. "A dangerous combination." "The best kind." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow, watching their son play, feeling the peace of the moment. "Nate." "Yes." "Do you ever think about having more children?" He looked at her, surprised. "I hadn't thought about it. Do you want more?" "Maybe, someday. Thomas should have siblings, brothers or sisters to grow up with." "You'd be a wonderful mother to however many children we have. And you'd be a wonderful father." Nate pulled her close. "Let's take it as it comes. If we're blessed with more children, we'll welcome them. If not, we have Thomas and each other. That's more than enough. More than I ever dreamed of having." Grace agreed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Thomas, tired from his explorations, came toddling back to his parents. Nate scooped him up. "Time to head home, little man." Thomas laid his head on Nate's shoulder, thumb in his mouth, eyes already drooping. They walked back to the wagon, Nate carrying Thomas, Grace walking beside them. As they crested the hill, the ranch came into view. Lights burning in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. Home. "It's beautiful," Grace said. "Our home, our life, all of it." "It is," Nate agreed. They climbed into the wagon. Thomas was already asleep in Grace's arms. As Nate drove them home in the gathering dusk, he felt something he'd thought lost forever. Contentment, not the absence of pain. He'd always carry the scars of losing Emma and Mary, but joy alongside the sorrow, hope alongside the grief, the ability to honor the past while embracing the future, to love again without guilt, to live again without fear. Grace had given him that. Thomas had given him that. And he'd given them safety protection, a home, a family. They'd saved each other. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Nate and Grace stood on their porch watching the stars emerge. "Do you remember the night we met?" Grace asked. "In the rain at the church. Every detail. I was so scared, certain I was going to die, certain there was no escape. And now I can't imagine my life any other way. The pain was terrible, but it led me here, to you, to this life. And I wouldn't trade this for anything." Nate kissed her forehead. "Neither would I." They stood together in silence, holding each other, feeling the night wind carry away the last remnants of their respective pasts. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. A cow lowed softly. The ordinary sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Ordinary, simple, perfect. "Grace, I love you, more than I thought possible. You healed wounds I thought would bleed forever. I love you too. You showed me that not all men are like Samuel, that love doesn't have to hurt, that I could be strong and soft at the same time. You were always strong. You just needed someone to remind you. We both needed reminding. That life goes on, that second chances exist, that broken things can be mended." Nate pulled her closer. "Not mended, transformed. We're not who we were. We're something new. Something built from the pieces of our old selves, but shaped into something better. I like that. Transformed, not just repaired." They stayed on the porch until the stars filled the sky, until the moon rose full and bright, until the cold drove them inside. In the house, in their bed, they held each other close. Two people who'd survived hell and found heaven. Two broken souls who'd discovered they could be whole together. Two damaged hearts that had learned to beat as one. Outside, the roses around the two crosses bloomed in the moonlight, red and white, beautiful and enduring, a memorial to the dead, and a promise to the living. That love doesn't end. It transforms. It continues. It grows new petals, even after the harshest winter. Emma and Mary were gone, but their love remained channeled now into the care Nate gave Thomas, into the tenderness he showed Grace, into the good man he'd chosen to continue being despite his loss. Grace's first son was gone, but his memory lived in the fierce protection she showed Thomas, in her refusal to let violence define her, in her choice to love again, despite knowing how much it could hurt. The past shaped them, but it didn't define them. They defined themselves by their choices, their courage, their capacity to hope. Morning came. Thomas woke early, as toddlers do, calling for his parents. Nate rose first, lifted his son from the cradle. "Good morning, little man. Did you sleep well?" Thomas babbled something incomprehensible, happy to see his father. Nate carried him to the window, showed him the sunrise painting the sky in gold and rose. "Beautiful world out there, Thomas, and it's yours. You're safe. You're loved. You're free to be whoever you want to be." Behind them, Grace stirred, waking. She watched her husband and son silhouetted against the sunrise. Her family, her future, her home, and she knew with absolute certainty that they would be all right. All of them. The ghosts of the past would always be there. But they were ghosts, not chains, memories, not prisons. Part of the story, but not the ending. This was the ending, this moment, this family, this love, this hard-won, fiercely protected, absolutely precious second chance. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Grace rose from bed, joined her husband and son at the window. Nate's arm came around her. Thomas reached for her. They stood together, the three of them, watching the new day begin. The last ride home was complete. Not the ride to death that Nate had been making for 7 years, not the flight from terror that Grace had begun in the rain, but the journey to life, to love, to family, to peace. They were home, finally, truly, completely home, and they would never be lost again. The sun rose higher, burning away the last shadows of night. A new day, a new life, a new family, built from ruins and hope, and the stubborn refusal to let tragedy have the final word. Grace looked at Nate. "What are you thinking?" He smiled. "That I'm the luckiest man alive. Even after everything, because of everything, the pain led me here, to you, to him." He touched Thomas's soft hair. "I wouldn't change that journey as hard as it was, because it brought me home." "We're all home now," Grace said softly. "Yes, we are." They stood together as the sun climbed the sky, warming the earth, bringing light to every shadow. Outside, the ranch waited. Work to be done, cattle to tend, gardens to plant, a life to build. But for this moment, they simply stood together. A father, a mother, a son, a family forged in fire and tempered in love, unbreakable and deeply, profoundly, completely blessed. Thomas squirmed, wanting down. Nate set him on the floor. He toddled off toward his toys, the resilience of childhood already moving him to the next moment, the next discovery. Nate and Grace watched him go. "He's going to be fine," Grace said. "Better than fine. He's going to grow up knowing he's loved, knowing he's safe, knowing that his parents chose each other and chose him." "He'll never know fear the way we did," Nate agreed. "We'll make sure of that. Not by sheltering him from the world, but by giving him the strength to face it, just like his mother." Grace smiled, leaned into Nate's embrace. They stood in their home, watching their son play, feeling the morning sun warm their faces. This was peace. This was redemption. This was the happy ending they'd earned through blood and tears and stubborn hope. And it was real as the sun rising, as real as the love in their hearts, as real as the child laughing at his toys. Real, and theirs, and forever. The story that began in rain and fear and desperation had transformed into something beautiful. A love story, a survival story, a redemption story. The story of two broken people who found each other and discovered that broken things, when joined together with love, could be stronger than they ever were whole. The story of second chances, of choosing to live after learning how to die, of finding light in the deepest darkness. The story of Nathan Carter and Grace Carter and Thomas Matthew Carter. A family, a home, a future written in hope instead of fear. And as the morning sun filled their home with golden light, as Thomas's laughter rang through the rooms as Grace and Nate held each other close, one truth stood clear and bright. Love doesn't end with loss. It transforms, it continues, it grows new life from old pain. And sometimes, if you're brave enough, broken enough, and stubborn enough to keep hoping, it gives you a second chance. A chance to come home, not to the home you lost, but to the home you were always meant to find. Spring had returned to Ashwood Creek. The same season that had brought Thomas into the world now witnessed his second birthday approaching. The ranch that had once stood gray and lonely now thrived with color and life. Nate stood at the fence line watching his small herd of cattle graze in the western pasture. 20 head now where there had been none a year ago. The barn had a new roof. The fencing was secure. The land was healing just as he was. Behind him, the sound of laughter carried from the house, Grace and Thomas playing in the garden she'd planted. Vegetables grew in neat rows. Flowers bloomed along the porch. The roses around Emma and Mary's graves had grown tall and full, their red and white petals a testament to love that endured. He walked back toward the house, watching his family. Grace knelt in the dirt, showing Thomas how to plant seeds. The boy's chubby hands patted the earth, more interested in the mud than the gardening. His blonde hair caught the sunlight so like his mother's, but his eyes, when he looked up at Nate, held a steadiness that reminded Nate of himself. "Papa." Thomas called the word still new and precious. He'd only started saying it a month ago, and each time felt like a gift. "What are you planting, little man?" "Flowers," Thomas announced proudly, though what he'd actually planted was probably just dirt. Grace smiled up at Nate, her face smudged with soil, looking more beautiful than the day they'd married. Motherhood had changed her. The fear that once lived in her eyes had been replaced by quiet confidence. The wounds Samuel had inflicted, both visible and invisible, had faded into scars she wore without shame. "He's determined to plant the entire garden himself," she said. "Like his mother. Stubborn." "Like his father, you mean?" Nate grinned, a sight that had become more common over the past year. He still carried the weight of his losses, but it no longer crushed him. He'd learned to bear it alongside his joys, the two balancing like scales. Doc Hayes arrived that afternoon for his weekly visit, bringing mail from town and news of the world beyond their ranch. He'd become more than a doctor to them. He was family, the grandfather Thomas had never had, the friend who'd stood beside them when no one else would. They sat on the porch, watching Thomas chase a butterfly through the yard with single-minded toddler determination. "Got a letter for you," Doc said, handing an envelope to Nate. "From the marshal's office." Nate's hand hesitated before taking it. That part of his life was over. He'd turned in his badge 7 years ago and never looked back. He opened it carefully, read, then smiled. "What is it?" Grace asked. "They're offering me a position, not as a marshal, as a trainer, teaching the next generation of lawmen at the academy in Austin." Grace's expression grew concerned. "Would you have to leave?" "Only 2 weeks a year, spring and fall sessions. They'd pay well, and they say I could bring my family." Doc leaned forward. "What are you thinking?" Nate looked at Thomas, now sitting in the grass, examining the butterfly that had landed on his hand with absolute wonder. Then at Grace, who watched their son with the same protective love Emma had once shown Mary. "I'm thinking," Nate said slowly, "that maybe I have something to teach, about what matters, about not making the mistakes I made, about being present for the people you love." "You'd be good at it," Doc said. "Teaching young lawmen that justice and family don't have to be enemies, that you can serve both." "I'd need to think about it. Talk to Grace." That night, after Thomas was asleep, they discussed it. Grace understood what Nate didn't say. This wasn't about going back to being a lawman, it was about redemption of a different kind, turning his tragedy into wisdom that might save other families. "I think you should do it," she said. "Not because we need the money, though it would help, but because you need to know that Emma and Mary's deaths weren't meaningless, that something good can come from it. 2 weeks away from you and Thomas. 2 weeks so you can help hundreds of other families stay together. I think Emma would approve." And she was right. He knew she was right. That night, Nate wrote his acceptance letter. When spring came, he would go to Austin. He would teach, and he would make sure the next generation of lawmen learned from his mistakes. Summer arrived with its familiar heat. On Thomas's 2nd birthday, they returned to the river, the same place where Nate had proposed to Emma, where he'd brought Grace a year ago to share his history. But today felt different, final in a way, like a circle completing. Thomas splashed in the shallows, supervised by both parents, shrieking with delight each time water sprayed his face. Grace had packed a picnic. They spread a blanket under the cottonwood trees, their shade offering relief from the relentless Texas sun. Nate watched his son play, and for the first time since the fire, the memory of Mary didn't bring pain, just warmth, just love. "I think I'm ready," he said quietly. Grace looked at him. "Ready for what?" "To forgive myself." The words hung in the air between them. Grace took his hand. "Tell me." Nate was quiet for a long moment, gathering thoughts he'd never spoken aloud. When I got back and found them dead, I made a promise. Standing over their graves, I swore I'd never forgive myself, that I'd carry that guilt forever as punishment, as penance." He looked at Thomas laughing as water dripped from his hair. "But watching him, I realized something. If I'd died and Emma had survived, I wouldn't want her to spend the rest of her life punishing herself. I'd want her to live, to love again, to be happy." Grace squeezed his hand tighter. "Emma loved you," she said. "And love doesn't demand endless suffering. Love wants happiness for the beloved." "I know. I finally know." Nate's voice broke slightly. "And I think wherever Emma and Mary are, they're not angry. They're not disappointed. They're glad I found you. Glad Thomas has a father. Glad I chose to live instead of just existing." Tears streamed down his face, not tears of grief this time, tears of release. "I forgive myself," he whispered. "Emma Mary, I forgive myself for not being there. And I promise to honor your memory by being present for this family, every single day." The words felt like chains breaking, like a weight lifting from his shoulders that he'd carried so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. Grace held him while he cried. Thomas, sensing something important happening, toddled over and wrapped his small arms around Nate's leg. "Papa said—" Nate lifted his son, held him close. "No, little man. Papa's happy, happier than he's been in a very long time." They stayed by the river until sunset, the same river that had witnessed 2 proposals, 2 loves, 2 chapters of one man's life. As they packed to leave, Grace said, "I'm pregnant." Nate froze, looked at her, saw the joy and nervousness in her eyes. "You're sure?" "Doc confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait until today to tell you. Seemed fitting. New life announced where you once celebrated life with Emma." Nate pulled her close, one arm around her, the other holding Thomas. "Another child," he breathed. "Another chance. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. A family of 3, soon to become 4. The past and future intertwining, both honored, both cherished. The night before Nate left for Austin to begin his teaching position, he couldn't sleep. He rose quietly, careful not to wake Grace, and walked outside. The ranch was silent under a blanket of stars. He walked to the 2 crosses, to the roses that bloomed eternal. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said softly to the graves. "Just for 2 weeks, to teach young lawmen about balance, about family, about not making the mistakes I made." The wind rustled the rose petals. "Grace is pregnant. We're having another baby. A daughter, she thinks. We're going to name her Emma Rose, after you both." His voice broke. "I hope that's all right. I hope you don't think I'm replacing you. I could never replace you. But I can honor you by being the man you believed I was, the father Mary thought I was, the husband Emma deserved." He knelt, placed his hand on the earth above their graves. "Thank you," he whispered, "for loving me, for making me a father, for teaching me what family means. I'll carry you with me always, not as guilt, as love." He stood, turned back toward the house. Grace stood in the doorway, outlined by lamplight, one hand on her barely swollen belly. She'd heard. She understood. Nate walked back to her, to his future, carrying his past, not as a burden, but as a foundation. They stood together in the doorway, looking out at the ranch they'd built, the life they'd created. "I was thinking," Grace said softly, "when Emma Rose is born, maybe we could plant a tree. Between the house and the crosses, something that connects them all, past and present growing together." "An apple tree," Nate said. "Mary always wanted an apple tree so she could climb it. Then an apple tree it is." They went inside, closed the door on the night. In the bedroom, Thomas slept peacefully in his cradle, soon to be moved to a proper bed to make room for his sister. Nate and Grace lay together, her head on his chest, his hand on her belly. "Tell me the story again," she said, "about the night we met." And so he did. He told her about the rain and the church steps, about a pregnant woman who'd survived hell and a broken man who'd forgotten how to live, about how they'd saved each other without meaning to. He told her about the journey through the canyon, about hiding in caves and facing down evil, about the moment she'd taken a bullet meant for him and how his world had stopped. He told her about falling in love so slowly he hadn't noticed until it consumed him, about learning to be a father again through Thomas's eyes, about discovering that broken things when joined with love could be stronger than they ever were whole. "And now," Grace asked, "how does the story end?" Nate smiled in the darkness. "It doesn't end. It transforms. We transform, from two broken people running from our pasts into a family running toward our future." I like that ending. It's not an ending. It's a beginning. Grace kissed him softly. "Then what comes next?" "Tomorrow I go to Austin. I teach. I come home. In 6 months Emma Rose arrives. Thomas becomes a big brother. The ranch grows. We grow. We live. And we love." "And we love," Nate agreed. "That's the point of it all, isn't it, to love, even after loss, especially after loss." "Especially after loss," Grace echoed. They held each other until sleep came peaceful and dreamless. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead. The roses bloomed. The ranch slept. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, between grief and joy, between what was lost and what was found, two souls rested. Emma and Mary, whose love had made Nate who he was. Grace and Thomas and Emma Rose, whose love made him who he would become. All connected, all cherished, all part of the same story. A story of second chances, of redemption earned through choice, of love that refuses to die. The story of a man who rode into town in the rain, dead inside, and rode out again, transformed. The last ride home, not to death, to life. And in the morning when the sun rose over the Texas plains, when Thomas woke calling for his papa, when Grace smiled that smile that made everything worthwhile, Nate would be there, present, whole, home. Finally, truly, eternally home. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.